Hi, welcome to The Inner Way. I'm your host, Father David Smith. We're going to continue our study of Unseen Warfare, the wonderful spiritual classic. I hope you've been enjoying this book as much as I have in my own spiritual life. I think I mentioned at the end of last week's video that the next chapter dealt with negligence. I was wrong. Chapter 19 deals with the bodily passions, and it's a very long chapter. And I love the chapter because it says the things that you can imagine it says about, the bodily passions, about basically removing ourselves from situations where the bodily passions become excited. But one of the things that has always caught my eye when I read that chapter is it urges us to be careful if we go to dances. So much of Unseen Warfare seems to be focused on monastics. In fact, that chapter seems to be focused on monastics, specifically saying have nothing to do with members of the opposite sex. And yet there's those little passages now and then that remind me and remind the reader that this is not just written for monastics, that this is for all of us. And so the writer throws in that little bit about, listening to music that excites the passions. Or going to dances. These are things that monastics don't even have the opportunity to do, and yet Unseen Warfare still addresses that kind of thing. The passage I want to read, that I want to look at, it kind of takes us, it's a little vacation from the way that we're going through this book, but there's one part of this chapter that has really made me reflect a lot this week. It talks about the thoughts that enter our minds and lead us to distraction, lead us toward temptation and forgetting about God. And this is one of the pieces of advice. There's a lot of advice about these kinds of things in this chapter. This is one of them. The remedy against thoughts, no matter whence they come, is various spiritual exercises compatible with your present state and dictated by it, such as reading of holy and salutary books, especially St. Isaac the Syrian, St. John of the Ladder, the Philokalia, and others of the same kind, devout meditations, and prayer. Now, I don't want to talk about the devout meditations and the prayer part. I'd like to talk about that other part. As I'm coming to a point in my life where I'm beginning to look forward years from now, but I'm beginning to see off in the horizon is the event of retirement. And I have a lot of books in my office. I have 7 bookshelves full of books. And I was thinking to myself this week, what am I going to do with all these books? I don't want to drag them around all over the place. And, Presbytera and I suppose we move into a little house someplace. I don't want the entire house to be filled with these books, And especially I use a lot of them for reference, but it's for writing sermons. And I use the illustrations in writing sermons. You know, when I'm retired, maybe I won't be doing that kind of thing anymore. And so I started to think, you know, what would, I'm not really sure yet what I'm going to do with the books, but I do know, what am I going to walk away from my office with? What books am I going to take with me that I say, this is it? This is what I want. I'm 60 whatever years old, I'm 70 whatever years old. For the rest of my life, this is what I'm reading. And I really decided that it was going to be St. Isaac the Syrian, the Ascetical Homilies, St. John of the Ladder, St. John Climacus, and the Philokalia. Now, we don't even have the whole Philokalia translated into English, and yet the parts that are in English, those are the things I'm going to take with me. And so, and you know, there are a couple of other books I would naturally throw in with those. One of them is Unseen Warfare, certainly, and another one is The Way of a Pilgrim. And so and the Bible, of course, the Bible. But and I kind of almost envision myself reading them, like reading St. Isaac, and then reading St. John, and just taking my time with all of those. A lot of times I read these books during Lent. And so I'll do like volume 2 of the Philokalia, and I'll read through it during Lent. The problem is that, you know, by the time I usually add the Triodion at the beginning and so on, it comes out to about 60 days that I spend reading during Lent. And but to say, okay, I'm going to read the second volume of the Philokalia, or the writings of Saint Isaac the Syrian, and just the ascetical homilies. By the way, there are people who are monkeying around with Saint Isaac the Syrian nowadays. You want to avoid them. They are not good people. You want to it's just the ascetical homilies. That's what he wrote, and that's what has been good for Christians for hundreds of years. But anyway, to read the ascetical homilies just during Lent, just during those 60 days, it's almost just like reading a novel. I'm kind of getting through it. Because I divide it up according to the days, and I'm just getting through it, and maybe a word will pop out at me, or a sentence or a thought will pop out at me, but for the most part, I feel like I'm just trying to get through it. And yet I don't want to do that. So I have, at one point in my life, I read St. John of the Ladder, and I read him very, very slowly. I did also the first volume of the Philokalia, and just really just took my time. Sometimes one paragraph a day, part of a paragraph, and just nibbled on that for the whole day, and it was wonderful. And so I'm kind of thinking, you know, if it came down to I'm going to take, you know, one box of books and I'm going to walk out of my office and leave the others behind, certainly these would be the books. And I certainly hope that you have the ability, you know, you have the possibility of reading these St. Isaac the Syrian, the ascetical homilies, St. John of Climacus, the Ladder of Divine Ascent, and the Philokalia as translated by Metropolitan Kallistos Ware. These are wonderful, plus The Way of a Pilgrim, and as I said, Unseen Warfare. So, you know, during this week I said to myself, on the inner way, as long as it takes us to go through Unseen Warfare, that's how long it takes us. So I'll move along as rapidly as the book allows, rather than trying to move on to do something different. So next week, we're going into chapter 19, which deals with negligence, I promise, and we'll take a look at the beautiful and helpful advice that unseen warfare has to give. I hope you can join us, and until then, God bless you, and I'll see you in church.